John chapter 3, verses 6 through 8. That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the pneuma is pneuma, Jesus tells Nicodemus. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born anew. The pneuma blows where it wills, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know whence it comes from or whither it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the pneuma. The idea that what is born of flesh is flesh and what is born of spirit is spirit accords very well with ancient physiognomics. The ancients believed that like begets like. A low life begets a low life. An elite begets an elite. Couldn't wrap their head around the idea that a low life would beget a great one. That doesn't make any sense in ancient understanding. So if that happened, and it did on occasion, the gods had to be involved in that somehow, or God had to be involved in that somehow. The old Latin and Syriac versions of this passage give us an explanatory note because they try to translate the meaning here. What is born of flesh is flesh because it is born of flesh. What they're expressing is ancient physiognomics. Like begets like. What is born of flesh is flesh because it is born of flesh, the old Latin and Syriac versions explain. Note that there is a subtle difference between being born of spirit and the common modern notion of a spiritual birth. To be born of spirit is like being born of Joseph. That is, it is the result of seed and therefore creates a like kind. The seed determines one's characteristics and makes one related to the donor of the seed. It thus establishes kinship. Note 1 John. 1 John chapter 3, verse 9. No one who is begotten by God commits sin, an act that dishonors God, because God's seed remains in him. He cannot commit an act that dishonors God because he is begotten by God. He's like God. Here, one begotten of God is said to have God's seed inside of him or her. Such persons cannot sin because they have been born of God. Consider 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 23. You have been born anew, not from perishable, but from imperishable seed, through the living and abiding Word of God. Here the new birth is said to be the result of imperishable seed, here in 1 Peter, unlike the perishable seed that produced the first birth. The notion of being born of God is prominent throughout the letter 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 29. If you consider that he is righteous, you also know that everyone who acts in righteousness is begotten by him, having the seed. 1 John chapter 3, verse 9. No one who is begotten by God commits sin because God's seed remains in him. He cannot sin because he is begotten by God. 1 John chapter 4, verse 7. Beloved, that is, attached ones, let us attach to one another because attachment is of God. Everyone who sticks together is begotten by God and knows God. 1 John chapter 5, verse 1. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, is begotten by God. And everyone who loves the Father, who sticks to the Father, sticks also with the one begotten by him. This is very interesting. He's not just saying people who intellectually assent to the idea that Jesus is the Messiah. He means something far more, a whole life conformed and glued up with in loyalty, ongoing, perduring loyalty with God and his broker, the Messiah Jesus. This is fascinating. 1 John chapter 5, verse 4. For whoever is begotten by God conquers the dominant society Israel. And the victory that conquers the dominant society Israel is our loyalty, faith. 1 John chapter 5, in other words, our sticking together is the Johannine Jesus group, which is the big push of the letters, because the community's not sticking together. It's splintering into multiple Johannine Jesus groups. So that love is in-group glue, sticking together. That faith is loyalty, ongoing, perduring loyalty, emotional embedding in the Johannine Jesus group. It's all stickiness. It's all gluing together. Well, that's how we know that we have conquered the world, the dominant society Israel. 1 John chapter 5, verse 18. If anyone sees his brother dishonoring God, shaming God, sinning, if the dishonor is not deadly, he should pray to God and he will give him life. This is only for those who sin, whose shaming God is not deadly. There is such a thing as a deadly dishonoring God, about which I do not say that you should pray. What do you think that is? Like splitting off from the Johannine Jesus group? You have to take this in the context of the letter. What's the author of the letter of 1 John, what's his big problem? We'll have to look at that in the future. So given this ancient physiognomics belief that like begets like, the new birth from above spoken about by the Johannine Jesus to Nicodemus shouldn't surprise us. It cannot be, and it shouldn't surprise Nicodemus. It cannot be from the flesh, because that would not result in kinship with God. Now, how this new spirit birth happens is not specified in Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus. It is simply said to be as mysterious as the wind was to ancient people, who had no control over the wind. Note the play on words here, using the Greek word pneuma, which means spirit and wind as well as breath. Don't know where it comes from or whither it goes. Hey, thanks for watching. Just continue the playlist for the next part of the study. If you have further questions, this is good. They will get addressed, so keep watching. If you found value, please subscribe, like, and share. As always, questions, comments, and criticisms are most welcome. God bless you.